Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to tonight's meeting. We are going back to Blomuir Passage Grave, and we have Hugo Anderson Wymark here. I'm delighted to say, I know a number of you would have been able to be present last year when we had our first exciting news about the passage grave that had been discovered last year. And Hugo gave us an very interesting talk in Kirkwall. So we're coming back for second helpings today, and Hugo is going to update us on what has been happening since then and on further discoveries. So just before I hand over to Hugo, can I just remind you of the protocols for Zoom presentations? When you come on, can I ask you to mute yourself when you come on? It means that we'll be able to hear our speaker more clearly and without distractions. Hugo will give the presentation. If questions occur to you in the course of the presentation, you may wish to put your questions onto the chat. And what we will do is we will read out the questions at the end and invite Hugo to respond to them. So if you're happy with that, if Hugo's happy, let's make a start. Over to you, Hugo. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be back this evening to speak to you about Blomuir Passage Grave again. We've had another season of excavation on the site, and so really I'm very excited to sort of bring you up to speed on what we've revealed over the last year of excavation, what our plans are for the future as well. So there are images of burials throughout this talk, so that's just a warning in case so you're expecting these things. But we are, well, I'm very happy to be speaking to you again about this site. I think last time I spoke to you, it was just after the news of the discovery had been announced, and we received an incredible amount of press coverage about the discovery of this tomb, from the front page of the Orkney to many national articles, but also the story was translated into various languages across the world, from Chinese to Greek to Vietnamese, all sorts. It really was a discovery that caught global attention. And really, if you're going to find a tomb, finding it in Orkney is the place to find it. And it really is, wonderful that it caught the attention that it did. But it just goes to highlight the wonderful, rich Neolithic heritage that there is in Orkney, and the fact that there is still so much out there to find, and that our story is constantly developing. So I'd just like to give you a quick recap on the discovery of this monument, because it's a story that I'll be talking a little bit more. We've discovered how this has evolved a little bit from our excavations this year. We've got a little bit of a refined understanding of how this site was discovered in the 19th century, and so I'd just go over this again. But when I spoke to you last time, I told you about the discovery of this was through treasure trove letters. So back in 1896, a series of letters, this being one at the bottom of the screen here, passed between the Procurator Fiscal in Kirkwall and the QLTR in Edinburgh about the discovery of a mace head and a stone ball. And I was going through looking at treasure trove cases in general at this time, but this one caught my eye. Not only was it Orkney, but it mentioned a mace head, another one of my key interests, and a Neolithic site, which I couldn't think anything, I didn't recognize at all. So, I mean, it was one which just sort of triggered this sort of bit of additional research around this discovery. Now, in the letter, there was a little newspaper clipping from the Orkney Herald, and this little note, no more than a couple of inches of column inches in there, but it provides a wonderful description of the archaeology that Kirster, James Walls Kirster, said that he'd seen at Blomuir, and an account of what he clearly thought was going to be a Neolithic site, but he thought it was largely destroyed. But he did note two artifacts that entered his collection. Now, when I was working with Mark Edmonds on the Orkney Stone Tools project a few years ago now, James Walls-Kirster's collection was one that really caught our imagination. And Kirster had donated his collection to the Hunterian Museum in about 1914 in the First World War. And so it didn't take me long to identify the two artifacts which were being described as coming from this monument. The stone ball here, you see, they didn't have accurate descriptions of where they came from, but they were easy enough to pin down. So this ball here has Ham written on it, and that was the one which clearly came from this tomb. And this mace head on the right here, we think this is in the Hunterian. I've still yet to find it in person, but certainly in the 1960s, it was last seen in the Hunterian when Fiona Rowe was doing her study on mace heads. But this mace head will be a stunning example. The rock is a Lewisian gneiss, and is probably much like one of the ones discovered at Ness and other fragmentary ones around that landscape. So a very fine mace head. I hope to go and find that in the Hunterian at some point in the next year. So we had potentially quite an interesting site to look for, but the one thing we didn't know was where this site exactly was on the farm of Blomuir. It could have been across quite a wide area. But it just was at the coincidence at this time that Chris G had discovered some papers which recorded James Walls-Kirster's archaeological discoveries. And on one page, there's this little sketch here showing what he saw on the ground with a note about the mace head and the stone ball. But the really useful bit of information here was 150 yards east of Blomuir. This set us onto the right path in terms of looking for that site. So the 2023 excavation was very speculative. We weren't sure if we were going to be digging in the right place, and we weren't sure if there was going to be a tomb there or if it was going to be some other archaeology, and we weren't sure if it hadn't been fully destroyed by the Victorian quarrying that had taken place on the site. So we were very relieved that quite early on in the excavation, we got through the Victorian backfill and found some stonework and evidence of burials in situ. So by the end of the season, we had revealed just enough of this tomb to begin to understand it. And so you can see we excavated just a little intervention at the top here, the north end of the tomb, to look for the cell that James Walls-Kirster had seen. And we excavated a slot across the bottom to test what else was preserved. And this is where we found our cell with in situ burials. But we discovered another cell here, which we didn't fully excavate, but we could see there was another skull coming through on the surface. That's what we call the southwest cell. I'm going to be talking about that later. So by the end of the 2023 season, we had enough evidence to draw this plan on the right here. Now, the dark colour represents the walls we saw, and the light grey represents speculative walls. There is a lot of speculation in this plan. So we were working from the shape of the cut we could see on the surface. We were trying to guess our way through this, and so that was our best guess of how it worked. But what we really needed to do was come back and see more of the archaeology at the bottom of the trench by taking out that Victorian backfill and actually properly get a proper plan of this monument and see what else was preserved. Now, last year, Nick Card asked me a question about the mound and what survived of the mound. And I gave a very vague answer because we actually hadn't seen a lot of the mound and we weren't quite sure how to interpret the soily deposit around the walls that were surviving. But we're confident now that all of this around it is natural geology. It's a sort of glacial till, and the actual stonework we have here, where the chamber and cells of this monument are, they're cut into the ground. So it's partly subterranean at the bottom. And so all we have surviving of this monument is the bit that was below ground. All of the massive cairn that would have covered this structure has been removed in its entirety. So just a few, the below ground elements surviving. So we don't have any of the sort of superstructure of this monument at all at present. Now in the South Cell, this was our really exciting discovery last year. We had 14 individuals buried in this cell. And as you can see from this photograph, the vast majority of these skeletons were fully articulated. And this is exceptional for passage graves in Britain and Ireland. You very occasionally get an articulated burial in one of these monuments, but more often than not, you have collections of bones where the skeletons have been moved around after they've turned to just bone, and the bones are stacked up in different parts of the monument or spread across the floor. Skulls are often put in interesting places. But here, besides some of the lower skeletons being a little bit more disturbed, the burials were still sort of fully articulated. And you can see most of them in a crouched position here with their legs raised up, some of them very tightly sort of bound together. One of the interesting features is that often these skeletons, these individuals had an arm or reached out towards another skeleton. So you can see in this, this individual here has a hand placed over the back of this individual, and this burial here, their hand is across the knee of this individual. So they're very sort of probably quite deliberate placement of some of these people within this cell in relation to one another. Now we've reconstructed this burial sequence, and we have 3 candidates for the first burial into this tomb and a few additional bones that could be quite early in the sequence. The blue skeleton we've had a lot of discussion about, because this sits in front of where we think the entrance to this cell was. So this skeleton doesn't have any relationship to any of the other burials. So it could be the first into the tomb or the last. And arguably, given that it's blocking the entrance, it's probably the last. But these 2 individuals in the light and dark red are very early in the sequence and are placed sort of very distinctly at either side of this cell. And then we have a whole sequence of burials added, some at the back of the tomb, not very well preserved. These are quite young individuals here as well. And then we have a series of skeletons placed discreetly across the floor of the tomb. And then towards the back and the side here, we see the burials beginning to get layered in the cell. So as it's filling up, they're beginning to put the bodies, stack the bodies on top of earlier burials. And the final burials in this cell are 3 quite young children. Now these 2 quite deliberately placed over the skulls of these 2 individuals here. So we're really interested in the future to try and determine the relationship of these individuals. Now, we sampled 100% of the deposits while we were excavating these individuals. We are very confident that there are no grave goods in this cell at all. But one thing that has come out is that associated with this light green skeleton up here of quite a young child, there were the bones of 1 or more fish. So we seem to have had a fish deliberately put in association with that individual. So a deliberate animal bone deposit, which is quite intriguing in its own right. Fish were consumed in the Neolithic in Orkney, but elsewhere in Britain in the Neolithic, fish was shunned as something that wasn't consumed at all. So we have quite an intriguing picture here. And I'll come back because that's not the only animal bone that we found in this tomb. So looking forward to last summer's excavation, we came back again for another 3 weeks. Again, the site was directed by Vicky Cummings and myself. and we had our osteoarchaeologist Sam Walsh with us too. But we had a much larger team than in 2023. We had 7 or 8 students in 2023 from University of Central Lancashire, but in 2024 we had up to 20 people on site at any one time. We had a number of volunteers from as far afield as the States, but many more local to Orkney, including quite a number of UHI's masters and undergrads volunteered with us, but we also ran a field school with UHI as well. So we had a wonderful team working with us, and it really was incredible. We got a vast amount of work done. It's a fabulous project for all, even though we all know it was a pretty cold and wet summer overall. So we had a plan that we would excavate the southwest cell because we knew there was at least one burial in there, but we also wanted to remove a lot of that Victorian backfill. And that's quite painstaking work. And we thought that we would probably excavate about half the Victorian backfill this season or last season. As it was, with our fantastic crack team, we actually managed to empty all of the Victorian deposits out of the central area of the tomb. So we excavated somewhere in the region of 15 cubic meters of Victorian backfill, and this was all hand sieved through a 5mm mesh to make sure we recovered every last fragment of bone and every last object. Now, there were only a few prehistoric objects there, but we did discover some quite interesting Victorian material that has helped us understand the story of the robbing of this monument for stone to construct buildings. So last year, I was talking to you about the 2 phases of robbing that we had on this site, because Kirster in his 1896 article mentioned that stone had been taken from the site at an earlier period of time, and then there appeared to be the 1896 intervention was, as Kirster described, the result of the children of James Sinclair excavating it. But his eldest child at that time was about 13 years old. And so we were slightly suspicious. There seemed to be quite a lot of digging going on at that time for such a young child. But what we can now see is that the dark blue here and the light blue is the earlier phase of stone removal. And this actually, they'd have removed the entire above ground cairn at this point as well. And then they went down into the little subterranean bit. The light blue marks the area where we had in situ burial deposits preserved. So just in these 2 cells. We were hoping that we might have burial deposits preserved around the other sides of the monument, but unfortunately, the Victorian quarrying of this site had gone through all of the archaeology. So we didn't have as much preserved in these areas as we'd expected. Now, the 1896 cut in the middle here in the gold, you'll notice it's quite rectangular. And as we were excavating it, it became very clear that the reason it's rectangular is that in 1896, they were removing much of the rest of the chamber wall of the Neolithic cairn. And this included quite a number of big blocks. And so actually, rather than it being a purely children excavating the site, it appears that there was another stone robbing event occurring in 1896. And so it was actually more extensive disturbance than Kirster had noted. And you'll note that Kirster's sketch here, he only saw the very top bit of the 1896 disturbance. It was actually a much larger area that was dug through at that time. Now, we've had the pottery looked at from the Victorian backfill, and we were originally speculating that the earliest phase of stone robbing might be late 18th or very early 19th century. And that would help us explain why it wasn't seen by any archaeologist of the time. But there are no finds in either phases of robbing that predate 1850. So we're faced with a genuine possibility here that the earliest phase of robbing was mid-Victorian, and then 1896 was when we see another phase of disturbance. So just at the time there was a lot of interest in the archaeology of Orkney, this tomb was being entirely dismantled without record. Now, there's a little bit more evidence provided here. The estate map of 1828 does seem to, it's just a sort of sketch of it here, really, but it does seem to show very few buildings at Blomuir in 1828. Particular note is this rather large building here that was constructed certainly by the time of the 1880 survey and the publication of the first edition Ordnance Survey map. Now, this structure, the structure I pointed out there, which appears between the two, is this building on the right here. Now, this picture of Blomuir was taken in 1981 by Raymond Lamb when he was out on site excavating a Bronze Age kist that Duncan Gowdy had found on his farm. So we have a little shot here of the structures as they stood then. But what's quite interesting to note is that the stonework between these two buildings is actually quite different. And the stonework of the building on the right is far more laminar stones, and it's slightly darker in colour than the other building. And that stone does actually look quite similar to much of the material we see used in the stone. So I feel certainly this structure here was one of the ones that was built out of stone from the tomb, but there were probably other buildings that used it as well. Now, I mentioned the timings here about when we think this tomb at Blomuir was dismantled, because the really interesting thing is George Petrie, one of sort of Orkney's most famous antiquaries, was a factor of the Graham's Hall estate. And you might have expected that he might have heard somewhere along the grapevine of something of archaeological interest being disturbed. But it seems that this bit of information seems to have escaped him. And we have a lot of his notebooks in the National Museum, and there is no reference to any site that sounds anything like this tomb at all. So it's the one that got away. So 2024, we went back on site. As I said, we removed all the Victorian backfill, and this has allowed us to gain a better understanding of the structure of the tomb. And this is our latest reconstruction of the arrangement of those chambers and the cell. What we can see now is that it's much more symmetrical than even we'd predicted last year. We have a very large rectangular chamber in the middle. It's about 4 meters long. It's about 2.7 meters wide, which is quite big for a Neolithic chamber tomb. And there are 6 very evenly spaced cells around the edges of the monument. You'll notice that the dark stone is the in situ stonework surviving from the Neolithic. And the Victorian robbers, when they were removing the stonework to quarry this and quarrying the site, they left us in some cases just a few stones on the ground to work out the position of the wall. Other areas and lines of walls were worked out where there were differences in the fill, where the stone had been removed and other stuff had been trampled in where it had been taken. So we've got a reasonably accurate plan of the tomb, although there's not necessarily a great deal of stonework left. And you'll notice the position of the chamber, the main stone that was used in the construction has disappeared, but what we had was the little prop stones that were used to level out the lowest course of stones were really impressed into the ground surface. And those got left behind when the larger stones were removed. So we've got little hints at where the form of this structure. What we're really excited by is the fact that this is a really nice, clear example of a Maze Howe type tomb. It has very close parallels with Quantiness, which is on mainland, obviously just down the road, and Coyness on Sandy. And you can see both of these have 6 rather symmetrically arranged side cells and large rectangular chambers, also very big mounds constructed around them. Now, Maze Howe is obviously the type site of Maze Howe type tombs, but back in the 70s, Colin Renfrew, when he was excavating Quantaness, argued that we should actually call this class of tomb the Quantaness Coiness type, because they're really the key examples of this monument. So here at Blomuir, we have another classic example of that form of structure. Now, the intriguing thing here, and the one thing we can't tell, is how tall this monument once stood. But both Quantaness and Coiness, they have very gradually corbelled chambers, and these rise up to an incredible height of about 4 meters high in both cases. Now, both of those chambers are slightly narrower. They're about 1.7, 1.8 meters wide. And generally, the wider the area you're corbelling, the higher your chamber will be. So we're probably here looking at a monument that was at least 4 meters high. Yes, about 3/4 of a meter might have been below ground, but we've still got over 3 meters above ground level. So it would be a very impressive structure in the Neolithic. I say all of that stonework is now gone. Now, the one thing you can't see on this plan is the passage. It is heading out to the east. It heads out almost precisely east. There's a little kink in it, but it's almost perfectly east. And it's actually aligned on the equinox, which obviously today is the equinox. So Blomuir in prehistory, this would have been the day that the sunrise shone through that passage. Quite intriguingly, we noticed this year that if you're stood down at the passage level, the far horizon disappears. It's only the near horizon you can see. But if you sort of stand up, you begin to see the far horizon beyond it. So it's actually a really interesting sight line to the east. So a very clearly, deliberately aligned monument, but many passage tombs are arranged east in Orkney or broadly down between that and south. So it fits in with the sort of general alignment of tombs in Orkney. One of the other things we've managed to pick out from the stonework we've observed is the sequence, or some of the sequence, which the monument was constructed in. As I mentioned, the area we have surviving is the subterranean part of the tomb. And it seems that actually the cut was made in the shape of the cells which they were looking to construct, as we have in a couple of places areas that have been subsequently backfilled with rubble when they've had a slight change in the design. So it seems that the hole in the ground, roughly in the shape of those chambers, was set out first. The passage was then constructed, and this again potentially hints at the importance of the alignment within that passage. And then we see the back walls of these cells being built tight against the cut. And one really interesting thing is that the form of the chamber seems to have not started being constructed until after the cells were being built at the back. This seems really odd, but this red line here marks a change in the stonework, where that sort of very symmetrical part of the cell seems to have been the original design of where the chamber wall should have gone. But then at some point, this area here, this wall was extended, this bit of the cut was backfilled, and the chamber wall was built across the front here. This clearly created a more symmetrical chamber in alignment with the north cell. But, you know, it potentially shows that idea of the monument. You know, there's a general plan of what it should look like, but it's sort of evolving slightly during construction, a bit of ad hoc changes as they're building it, which is slightly why it's more squint in some ways than others. But that's a really nice little bit of evidence there. Now, the other thing we've got a little insight into this year is where the stone came from. So Tom O'Brien came out and undertook a drone survey of our site. We've processed this into a 3D model. So we have a lovely contour map of all of the humps and bumps. But one thing that jumped out immediately was this very dark patch here, and you could still see it on the ground. It's in a sort of hollow in the field, but it's very clearly a quarry site. And you can see it's in the area of about 22 by 16 meters, which is somewhere in the region of the size we would expect the cairn to be over the monument. So it's just downhill, only about 30 meters away. So we think this must be the quarry for the cairn. So it's quite nice to discover that. But we've got no idea, obviously, what volume of stone was removed because we've not done any field work on that at all. So in 2024, this is the plan of the tomb from above. So this is a clip taken from a 3D model. You can, again, it really, we've removed all the Victorian backfill by the time this model was created, and you can really see how little stonework survived of the Neolithic monument. But as I said, just enough to allow us to reconstruct it, its form. But the Victorians, when they were taking out the stone, and digging through the archaeological remains in much of it, they did at least tend to stop on the floor surface. So this tomb across much of the floor has a sort of rammed clay surface, so much as you have on flooring in Neolithic buildings at the Ness of Brodgar and on other sites. And so you can see the skeleton. We've still got some of the skeletons in situ in the southwest cell here, but that sort of surface there is the clay floor surface. Now, the clay floor survived pretty much across the whole of the middle of the chamber area here. And you notice this quite dark patch here and a couple of other dark patches. And these are areas of in situ burning. So we seem to have had fires set within the structure at various points in that main chamber, which, you know, could be to sort of cleanse the space, could be to give light, but certainly you'd probably want to have a little bit of ventilation through the top of the tomb. It's going to get very unpleasant in there. But there certainly is a slight difference in the activity we're seeing in the central chamber here to the side cells. One of the things which we were very lucky to get this year was a little bit of in situ tomb deposits here in the chamber, just about 1 meter square. And this had been missed by the Victorian excavators. They'd only taken off the top surface of it, but not down to the actual floor surface. So this was our one little area. We got a really good glimpse at what the original deposits looked like in this area. We didn't have human burials in the chamber. What we did have was a handful of artifacts. And they included this rather nice stone ball. See, it's a little round stone ball. It's very similar to the one that was found in 1896. And an absolutely sort of cracking example and really interesting to us because it means there are two of these round stone balls from this site. When Vicky and I excavated at Tresness, the Stalled Cairn on Sandy in 2021, we found 2 stone balls in that tomb. And research we've done on this style of ball in Orkney reveals there are about 20, and a good number of them have associations with funerary monuments. So that's really intriguing. But what's as interesting is that when we look at the bigger picture, round plain stone balls are a feature of Irish Neolithic passage graves as well. So these are not uncommon to find in Irish passage tombs of about the same period. So again, there's something that ties this into the bigger picture of monuments right the way around the west coast of Britain and into Ireland. So really, really interesting to find. The other thing we found here was 2 sherds of round bottomed pottery. Again, really intriguing because Quantaness had a very large assemblage of grooved ware, which is later in date. So that pottery is interesting. I'll come back to that in a second. And the other thing in this area, we had a number of bones, animal bones, including sheep metatarsals. So we have a slightly different different activities potentially going on in this part of the chamber than the rest of the site. One thing we didn't find in the floors here were any pits or scoops or burials into pits, which is what has been found or was found at both Quantiness and Coyness. So slightly different different archaeology here in that respect. Now, our really exciting finds this year were more articulated burials. So in the southwest cell, we removed the Victorian rubble. Again, we think, as with the other cell, we think this was an intact corbelled structure until it was broken into in the Victorian period and rubble drops down onto the burials, as you can see them here. And so you can see here it's very extensively, the walls have been removed almost to the lowest course across much of this area here, entirely removed along this front edge, but they left those burial deposits intact across this area. And that's quite a small cell. It's about 1.5 meters across. And within that area, we had 9 articulated burials and a single bone of a neonate in there as well. So you can see here the skulls of 3 individuals in this area, and then I'll show you a sequence of the burials that we had. One thing that was quite intriguing, again, we found no grave goods, but we did find 2 animal teeth. We had a cattle tooth located over this individual, and we had what we thought at the time might be a whale tooth, but it turned out to be an upper pig incisor associated with another burial. So again, 2 animal teeth in this section of the tomb, but no other burial goods. So yes, with these 9 individuals, the 14 from last year, the 8 that Kirsta saw, that we have recovered a significant number of bones from the Victorian backfill, we have a very good population of people from this tomb, a minimum of 34, but we have yet to fully analyse the remains we recovered from the Victorian backfill fully, so that total could go up significantly. But it's a very significant local population from the Neolithic. It's worth noting as well that while you can see here we have relatively good bone preservation within the Neolithic deposits that are in situ, amongst the material from the Neolithic backfill, because it had been dug through such a wet clay soil, the bone in that deposit was much worse preservation. Clearly over the last 150 years, it had deteriorated to quite a significant extent. So it's quite fortunate that we could recover it when we did, because it was being lost entirely to decay. So those changes that were brought about by demolishing this tomb have had a lasting effect on the bones here. So the articulated burials that we've discovered so far, you can see on the in a total plan on the right-hand side. On the left, we have 2 possible candidates for the earliest burials in this southwest cell. The middle burial, placed very central to that cell, is a teenager, and then we have an adult placed against the back edge of the cell here, again in a crouched position as the other burials have been recorded. And again, similar to the other cell, we then see subsequent burials placed out in proximity, often quite close to the other skeletons, but placed around, in this case, around that central individual. And particularly along this side, we see, as you saw in that first image, the skulls being placed very close together of these individuals here. To this right-hand side of the cell, we have a number of child burials going into the tomb. So we really do have a full population here: men, women, children, babies. The full population of this local area seem to have been being buried within this tomb. And finally, well, not quite finally, but we have burials beginning to be stacked over one another when this cell begins to fill up. And again, around the back edge, this individual here, their position mirroring that earlier burial, as we'd seen in the adjacent south cell, and again this another child placed over this teenager here. North south, we have a foot to the north here, but because that burial was very high in the sequence and the Victorian disturbance came down into it, it's a little bit more disturbed than some of the other burials. But we think again it would have been fully articulated burial. So this is really a truly remarkable sequence of burials in this monument. There really isn't any Neolithic tomb in Britain or Ireland that has articulated burials preserved in this fashion, with basically very limited disarticulated material too, no attempt to move these around. So we have a really interesting question here as to how they remained preserved in this articulated position. Did these cells get blocked off in prehistory? Did the tomb somehow get backfilled or collapse, which stopped these being disturbed at any later period, and those bones moved around? It's really interesting possibilities as to how these remained in this original position. Now, we have recently sent off 2 dates from one on bones from 2 individuals in the southwest cell, one that was one of the earliest burials and one that was one of the latest. And these should hopefully, or they will, show us the time in which the tomb was in use. And this is going to be really fascinating. So I can't wait to share this with you when we get these results back, because one of the things that is really interesting and really needs a lot further research is the chronology of Maes Howe type tombs. The dates as they stand for Quanteness and Coyness are a little bit perplexing, because there are a number of quite early dates in both tombs. And certainly the current modelling indicates that they start somewhere between 3450 and 3200 BC. Yet, as we've seen, it's grooved ware that went into Quanteness, and that's after 3200. That's later. So the presence of these earlier burials has often been tried to be explained by their bones that have been brought in from elsewhere, and the tomb is actually later in date. The dates we get on Blomuir are articulated individuals. They went in there in that fashion, so they will date the use of that tomb. And this will be really intriguing in terms of the bigger picture of where this style of monument fits into the wider picture of passage graves around Britain and Ireland. It's often thought that this sort of more grand style of tomb in Orkney came about after the big constructions we've seen in Ireland. So the main passage grave at Naus was constructed around 3200, New Grange around 3100, and it's really thought that, you know, Orkney came somewhat after that, but we really need to see how this fits in the sequence. So that's something that we'll get a bit more clarity on in due course. But yes, beyond the burials, we also had some quite interesting discoveries in terms of some of the surviving stonework. I've just put up here, we had a number of examples of rock art that we discovered this year. I think last year we just had 3 scratches in this middle stone here, but a close examination of the stone this year revealed quite a large number of sort of decorated stones in this part of the wall here. For those of you who are familiar with the sort of incised designs you get at the Nessa Brodka, sort of the character of the rock art we've got here, you can see various deeply incised grooves here, parallel lines with lots of finer lines. You have some that are moving towards triangles, and then on one slab we have a sort of lattice decoration. Now, most of these designs are on the inwards facing side of the cell, but really intriguingly, this lattice design is on this fab here, and it's on the top face of the rock. So that stone must have been decorated when it was put into the structure. So we know from that stone that some of these designs were being incised as the tomb was being built. And this is really intriguing. You obviously can't dismantle upstanding tombs to find out this information, but we've got a little glimpse here that this mark making was occurring during construction. And this feeds into some of Antonia's fantastic work on Nessa Brodka, where she has dismantled parts of buildings and discovered that various panels, various stones with decorations on are being built into the structure, potentially made and built into it as part of that construction process. So it's something we're seeing here. It's also very nice to find sort of decorated stones in an entirely untouched tomb. Obviously, if you go to Coween or Coines, you can see some of these designs if you look very carefully with a torchlight across the surface of those stones. But there's so much modern graffiti and scratch marks on there as well that they're sometimes quite difficult to pick up. But here we have a really nice fresh example of this material in situ. So I just briefly want to touch on future work. We're coming back for one more season's excavation, another 3 weeks in August. We will be finishing our excavation of the main tomb this year by excavating the passage, which you can just see here on the geophysics. We're really intrigued to find out how long that passage is. We can see here probably the bit that's robbed out on the geophysics because it's effectively the form of a very large ditch. But we don't know how it terminates. We know as it's sort of cut into the ground, it must end in some fashion. And so we're really intrigued to see what happens at the end of that entrance. And you often get some so that could be quite intriguing in its own right. And it could also help us in terms of understanding the overall size of the cairn that was built over this monument. Now, the green arrow points at another anomaly that showed on the geophysics. And we're planning on digging a little intervention into that because it's a bit intriguing. We don't know what it is. It's slightly smaller than the center of the passage grave, but it's still a sizable feature. It's about 5 meters across. And that seems a bit big for a kist, but it could be a Bronze Age kist, or could it be one of these sort of monuments like Crantit that's somewhere between a Bronze Age kist and a tomb, or might it be another Neolithic feature outside, such as at Taverso Tuit, where you have a little subterranean feature that had lots of pottery buried in it outside the monument. It's sort of less than a few meters away from the front of the passage. So it's a really intriguing position. So we'll take a little look at that this summer and find out what's going on there. I also want to flag that we had Alice Roberts out. You might have seen Digging for Britain in January. It's still available on playback, and I quite enjoyed the slot. It's a good 10 minutes on Blomuir. But what was really exciting was that Alice Roberts' enthusiasm for the potential of this site to tell us so much more about the Neolithic population of Ham. You know, we're going to start doing an initial assessment of the human remains before too long, and this will then allow us to initiate studies of aDNA isotopes and really get to grips with the population, their relationships to each other in life, in death, and then across Orkney and beyond. So that's where the real excitement begins. So I'll be back talking to you again when we start to get interesting results from those studies too. So that really concludes my update for today. I'd just really like to thank everyone who's made this project possible, Ian and Anne Muir for letting us excavate on the land and all the other assistance they've given us so far. Also, we wouldn't have been able to do this without funding, and Orkney Archaeology Council's Archaeology Fund have greatly helped us, as has a British Academy grant and the Society of Antiquaries of London. And that, you know, that's just been incredibly valuable. But really, the people who've made it a very enjoyable experience, all the students and volunteers who came and assisted us with our excavation, and friends and colleagues from Orca who have helped us along the way as well. So it's a real thank you to everyone who's assisted us and been involved with this project so far. So if any of you have any questions, I hope there's some going in the chat. Do put them in the chat and I will try and answer them. But I'll try and find a video so I can see people as well, if that's okay.
Thank you very much, Hugo. That was a model presentation, lucid and relevant and absolutely fascinating. And I think probably tonight's audience probably shared the enthusiasm that Alice Roberts had when she was speaking about the potential that this too is going to provide for us. But you've certainly taken us further down that road tonight, and thank you very much for it. Looking at
it's a pleasure. It's always funny doing these things online, and I just talking to my monitor, so I couldn't see it. I couldn't see any of your faces. So anyway, yeah. It's always a great pleasure to speak to you.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you may not have seen our faces, Hugo, but you were very personable, I have to say, very personable. One of the first comments that came on, Hugo, was that saying that nailing the car from Raymond Lamb's 1981 photograph as being Raymond's maroon singer Shammy. So there we have it. There's our first historical nailing.
Okay, so it might have been he was photographing the car rather than the buildings.
Indeed, yeah. But what I'll do just now, Hugo, is I'll hand over to Hayley, who will take us through questions as they come up. And I noticed that there's a question there already. Hayley?
Yeah, thanks ever so much, David, and thank you, Hugo. That was fascinating. So the first question we've got up is from Gail, who wants to know if the site will be open to the public during this summer's dig.
It's quite difficult access, so we tend not to have it open to the public too much. But we do have people come and visit us. But it's really the challenge of the turning off that main road there, which is quite difficult. So we don't open it as a public dig, but do get in touch if you'd like to see it, because we do welcome people to the site.
Thank you. The next is really more of a comment, I think, but it says, wonderful update, Hugo. It was a privilege for me to volunteer, to have been at the dig last summer. I'd like to return this August. That's from Nancy Munro.
Oh, excellent. Hello, Nancy. Yes, do get in touch. If anyone does fancy coming out and digging with us, yeah, do just email me at my email address at the National Museum, which is hugo.andersonwymark@nms.ac.uk.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, that kind of picks up Kate's question, which was the next one, which was how do I volunteer for next year? But
yes, get in touch. We're going to be a bit smaller team again this year, but again, hopefully some interesting discoveries. And yeah, we're very keen to have as many volunteers as we can on site. So no, that's
brilliant.
Great.
Okay, and then Claire's asking, what are the dates for this year's dig, please, and what are you hoping to uncover?
Ah, right. Okay. Let me check the dates off the top of my head. Well, I'm checking the calendar. It is, I think, 11th of August to 29th. So 3 weeks in August. This year, so we're hoping that we will find the rest of the passage. We expect some of that, the stone has been removed. It had very good quality stone in the couple of courses we saw, but we're hoping that it will give us a better understanding of its alignment. And as it ends, we just want to find out how it opens up to the world, because it's quite low down, it's subterranean, and it's actually, yes, if it just continues flat, it could be a very long passage. But if it rises up, then it would be quite unusual in terms of the Neolithic architecture, but it might give us a little insight into the size of the monument. So we don't know how much we'll find of the structure, but we're hoping that left us some impressions of the stone, so we get the idea of the size and form of that, and a hint of what the cairn might have looked at. But the other monument we're going to take just a very small look at. Well, all we know is it's something below ground. It's a hole below ground, which is quite big, possibly some stonework along one edge. We don't know what it's going to be, so it could turn out to be anything. So that's going to be a bit of our mystery for the summer. So we just have to see. I keep telling my colleagues at the museum, if it's Bronze Age, we're going away quite quickly. But if it's Neolithic, that will be wonderful. But I'm told I also have to enjoy the Bronze Age.
Well, we'll look forward to hearing about that next year when you come back, Hugo. That'd be brilliant. So after that, we've got more of a comment from Linda. Really just says, thank you for a fascinating presentation. What a find. We have our share here in Dorset, but Orkney never fails to astound me. Such is absolutely the case. Then Deborah...
There's always more to be found, it seems.
Absolutely. Then Deborah's got a couple of questions. In the southwest chamber, you mentioned one infant bone. Is that because the rest of the child's bone has disappeared? And I'll come back to the second question after that.
Yes. Yeah. Bone. They're very small bones, so the preservation is pretty good for Orkney, but we have lost some bone preservation, so we think that's just down to preservation. But yeah, as I said, we have noticed a very significant difference between the bone that is within the in situ deposits and the condition of the material that's been dug through the Victorian deposits. That's just accelerated that rate of decay. So while they were probably, if they were in cells which were intact, all of that water would have been kept off of them. They'd have been kept wonderfully dry for the best part of 5,000 years. But then the removal of that roof in the Neolithic was bad for the things that were in situ, and then the digging through of that through those other deposits just really accelerated that rate of decay. So you know, we did find quite a few teeth in the Victorian backfill, and a lot of that they survive better than many other bones. So we suspect when we look at the preservation in detail, we'll get a better idea of that. But it certainly seems to be quite poor.
Yeah, thank you. The second question there is the barn still standing? And if so, has anyone looked for marks on the stones it is built from?
Sadly, it was Blomuir farm was rebuilt about 2016, and it was built on the site of the earlier structures. So so the stone from that building has gone. So we've chatted to the owner of that, but yes, it's not much of the original structure surviving to look at. Which yes, it would have been worth doing that if it had been still been there. But
yeah, definitely. Claire would like to know, would there be anything under the clay floor?
We excavated some of it, and there wasn't, no. So it was worth investigating because, again, much like in Neolithic buildings, you can seal things into floor surfaces. This seemed to just have a single layer of clay flooring. It didn't appear to have been resurfaced at any time. But when we removed it, we just ended up, there was a sort of leveling layer of shillety stone over the sort of stone surface. So they'd terraced through the glacial till they hit a solid stone, and that seemed to perhaps the sensible thing to do. They were building the chamber on the solid rock rather than on top of a slightly powdery till. But that was maybe the reason for quarrying it underground in a little area. But no, sadly, nothing buried in the floors here, and that might be because they were on bedrock as well. It was probably quite difficult to dig a hole down.
Okay, next comment is from Nigel Jennings. Hi, Nigel. Great update, Hugo. As you implied, the large size of the structure implies a high overall ceiling. Intriguing possibility that this might have contributed to an unplanned collapse of the structure before any chance of disturbance to the skeletons could have occurred.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's a real shame we don't have really the collapsed material surviving or more of the stonework to assess that. But that could well be a possibility. It's significantly wider than other Maze Howe type passage graves. So other than the Maze Howe, which is obviously square and 4.5 meters or 4.7 meters across, it's a little bit. It could be that reason that there was a collapse, but but we can't tell from the stonework that survives. So that's a little unfortunate, but it is a possibility as to that it had quite short use. But again, when we date more of the burials, and we can date the animal bone and the charcoal in the chamber as well, we'll get potentially a really good idea for the use of this monument. As it is always difficult to actually date the construction of these monuments, and here we don't really have any good deposits for dating the construction, but we do have an incredible range of material that will date the use of that monument. So all we can hope is that it falls one side or other of the plateau in the radiocarbon curve between about 3,200 and 3,000, which is, you know, that's a terrible time in that curve where it just spreads out. So if it much earlier or pushes after, we'll know. But if it falls in that area, it won't really help us refine the dating at all greatly. And that was our Tresness tomb. All of the dates after Bayesian modelling came out that it was somewhere between 3,200 and 3,000. So that was we'd hoped for a really tight chronology, but we didn't get it.
Thank you. We've got a few more questions just coming in. So next one is from Paul Sharman. Hi, Hugo. Great talk. Will you be investigating the quarry?
No, it's not an initial plan. We know that it's been backfilled in the 70s, 80s. It was still quite a prominent feature. And so much of the ditching project's excess soil went into that as well. So I think there'd be a lot of modern material to take out of it as well. So it's not something we initially planned to do, because it would be quite a large amount of work, I think. But yes, it's certainly, we know it's very clear on the ground, but it would be a big project. When we got a digger on site, it would make quite a big hole, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Marion would like to know, is there anything significant or distinctive about the stone balls or the mace head? And thank you for your presentation.
Oh, right. Okay, thanks. Well, stone balls, both of the ones from this site are very simple, quite plain sort of pecked balls. They're both slightly flattened in the shape, but yeah, they're not like the nicely polished examples we had from Tresness, but they do stand out there. They don't appear to have any really, they're not like hammer stones where you get sort of facets of use. They don't seem to show any wear on them at all at present. So if you get to get them under a microscope and give them a really detailed look, but yes, they look quite similar to each other, but they don't stand out as the sort of fanciest ones. The mace head is very interesting. Again, I really hope we can find this object in person, because I think that stone is a Lewisian gneiss, which outcrops either on the Point and Ness in Lewis or at Scoury on mainland. So again, it's come some distance into Orkney, so that's quite intriguing. It is a really beautiful stone.
Great, thank you. Again, more of a comment, but this is from Keith. Thanks again, Hugo. Spoke to Alice at Brodgar immediately after her visit to you, and she was blown away. So it sounds like absolutely, as you were saying, she was very impressed with it. David's question is, pondering about the floor area extent and the number of skeletons found, the tomb has a high potential capacity. Does this mean its builders had an expectation that their community would eventually fill it, so we're an already fairly well established community, or is there just a hint of a baby tomb with extensions as and when needed?
I think it was built in one go. Yes, I don't think we have any. I don't think you could necessarily have constructed one bit without constructing the rest before you use it. But yes, it would have had a high capacity. Certainly, we know the North Cell had Kirster recorded 4 skeletons in it, and 4 in an area hereabouts to the south. But that was without proper excavation, as it were. So there certainly were individuals in other cells. We did have a slight trace of one mandible possibly submerging in Northwest Cell. It was just a trace of it left, and it appeared that it was possibly still in situ. So there probably were burials in at least 2 of those other cells, but we obviously don't know how many. We'll get an idea from the amount of bone in the Victorian backfill, but we don't know where everything went, obviously. So yes, it is a large number, and it does appear to have been certainly those 2 cells. If they were typical of the whole monument, then yes, we could be dealing with 60, 70 individuals. But that's not unusual for some Orcadian tombs.
Okay, thank you. There's another couple of questions just coming through. Probably start to wind the questions up now. So Diane just says, thank you for a most interesting talk. Carrie asks, you mentioned charcoal. Was that found in a fireplace?
Yeah, we had charcoal from all 3 of those burnt patches. So we had the sort of reddening, and then we had sort of little horizons of charcoal above it. So yes, we do have sort of hearthwood. We've yet to get that analysed to know if it's lovely, small, short life charcoal that we can date. But we can, yeah, we'll be looking at that in due course. We've yet to have all of our environmental samples processed. So we probably will get more charcoal, but certainly within the tomb deposits around in the cells that were intact, there didn't appear to be much in the way of charcoal, you know, to the eye. But you know, in the chamber it was slightly different. So
thank you. And there's a question from Sigurd. Any preliminary thoughts on the presence of round bottom pottery on the central chamber floor? Interesting similarities to the layout of Isbister, but without their orthostatic pairs.
Yeah, it's a good parallel. It is a bit intriguing, and again, we've got to see where our radiocarbon dates turn out, because yes, it could be that this pottery is not as early as it could be, but we don't know. The pottery, we've got their nice fresh sherds. They're quite big, but they're just the bottom of round bowls, quite open bowls. So yeah, we don't have any decorated sherds. So we can't really say too much about it at the moment. Besides, it's got every sherd we've got is basically from a round bottom bowl, but there's only a few of them. So there's not too much we can say at present. But the lack of any grooved ware is probably quite notable compared to Quantum S. So there is going to be something intriguing in that.
Yeah, and then I think that's it really for the questions. We've got a couple more comments from folk. Debbie says, thank you for a fantastic update. Can't wait to hear what you find with the analysis of the bones. And yeah, I'm sure we all share that, Debbie. It'd be really great to look at that. And finally from Deborah, absolutely super excavation. Looking forward to future updates. Thank you for a fascinating talk. And I think that's way. So Kate has said, this is the best way I could spend my afternoon. Thank you so much for this. So Kate, and I'm not sure if you're one of the folk, we've got a couple of people that have joined us from the States. So I don't know timing wise, Kate, if you're one of them. In fact, I think you might be, but we've got folk from Texas and Maryland that have joined us. So it's great to have people.
Fabulous.
Yeah, Kate says she's in the States. So that's brilliant. How great to have folk joining us. And I think that's probably it for the chat.
That's fabulous. Thank you.
So back to David, I think, to finish, unless you want me to just do a couple of announcements, David.
I wonder if you could just what's coming up next, and then we'll just round things off. Hayley, thank you.
Yeah, that's fine. And Elizabeth just made a comment, which is a really good one, which I'll pick up in a second. So just to say the next events that we have planned for the Archaeology Society, our next talk is on the 30th of April, which is an in-person talk by Esther Rennick, who works for the Historic Environment Scotland. And her talk is entitled Simply Amazing, Managing Orkney's Properties in Care. That's going to be at the St Magnus Centre on the 30th of April. We are struggling, I'm afraid, at the moment to find somebody to film that talk for us, so we may not be able to film it. So that's just a warning. So folk that are not in Orkney, unfortunately, you may not be able to see that. We will carry on trying, but at the moment I've not been able to find anybody who can do that. But we will try. Then after that, our next event, if you like, is our Society's annual general meeting. And that's going to be on the 22nd of May. And that will be a Zoom AGM. We agreed a few years ago that we would always do our AGMs on Zoom so that our members from all over the world can join in. We are not having a talk at that. That will literally just be annual general meeting business, but that also includes looking back at what we've done this year and what our plans are for the future. So we would still very much hope to have people involved in that. And the reason why we're not doing a talk attached to that meeting is that the week after that, May the 28th, is an in-person talk with a discussion between Nick Card and Mark Edmonds, and that's going to be at the King Street Halls. We've not got tickets available for that yet, but we will be advertising that to our members. The tickets availability will go out to members first, and then we'll follow on to the general public shortly after, probably a few days after. And that's because the King Street Halls, obviously much bigger than the St Magnus Centre, but they're nevertheless not as big as the Orkney Theatre. So we may have to restrict ticket numbers on that. But if you are a member, if you follow us on Facebook or on Twitter or X or Blue Sky or wherever we've got our social media, we will send out the details as soon as they're available. So those are the 3 events we've got coming up: April the 30th, then the AGM on the 22nd of May, and then the conversation between Nick Card and Mark Edmonds on the 28th of May. And the other point I was just going to raise, which has been raised by Elizabeth, and George has just put the link into the chat, is the Tomb of the Eagles community crowdfunding project that is underway at the moment. And folk will, I'm sure, be aware that there's a really exciting project underway, community-led project down at the Tomb of the Eagles, aiming to hopefully get the Tomb of the Eagles back open to the public towards the end of this year, probably September, maybe a little bit later. But that is subject to funding bids, because there's a project underway to actually buy it. And also then they're currently trying to raise £20,000 towards the sort of initial setup and running costs. Very pleased to say that Orkney Archaeology Society is supporting this, both practically and financially, but we will also, they are encouraging people very much to donate at the moment if they can, appreciating that's not always an easy thing for folk to do. So if you could spare a few pounds, that would be brilliant, and the link is in the chat to take you through to that. And I think, David, that's me finished.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Hayley, for these announcements. And that just about brings us to the end of tonight's session, folks. Hugo, I think the comments in the chat said it all. A fascinating talk, illuminating, and what has been an exciting discovery so far has just been made even more exciting by what you've said. And as one of the comments made, we can't wait to see what the ongoing explorations of the human remains throw up for us. So once again, Hugo, thank you for your talk tonight. We look forward to hearing from you again. And thank you to our audience, whether you be here in Orkney or from other parts of the world. We look forward to seeing you again, either in person or online. Thank you and good night.
Yeah, thank you all. Lovely to see so many friendly faces.